when I was 14, David's a few years older than me. He was 17, I believe, 16, 17. But he had a beautiful motorcycle. He had a beautiful Ducati, and I would see him in the neighborhood driving this beautiful machine, and he had great leather motorcycle clothes and everything. And I said, "Who's that?" I mean, and then I found out he made films. And at that time, we used to go to midnight, kind of underground film festivals. They'd happen on the weekend. So when I was 16, I would go to see these weekend shows, and they would show a lot of David's films and a lot of other films, Kenneth Anger, even the kind of experimental short films were being shown. So I knew of David's work, and it was exciting. But and we had some mutual friends and acquaintances in Toronto, because it's very small. But it was many years later. It wasn't until I think I was about 28. I think it was 1977 that I got up the courage to kind of approach him and see if I could work on one of his films.
What did he say?
Well, I had done one film before that. It was a Canadian, very spectacular crime drama, The Demeter Trial, it was called. And it was Elka Summers starred in it. And he said he knew that film. And that was the only film I had done. And I developed all my own techniques because I didn't have any real training for working in film. So I developed all my own system just by reading. I just read a lot and kind of studied it on my own. And I thought, oh, I could maybe figure out how to do this and this. So I developed a lot of my own techniques. And so he said he took me on, and that was the first time that he had worked with a composer. Before that, he had worked with library music. And they just used things that they pulled out of music libraries, and he put in his films. So The Brood was the first film for him, and first with me, with the director.
You've done 15 films with him, which is
I have done 15.
obviously one of the closest collaborations in the history of film between a composer, even more than Herman and Hitchcock. And when you first came to film composing, who were the composers you admired? I mean, the studios had resident music directors like Alfred Newman and Max Steiner, but I think you had a particular soft spot for Elmer Bernstein, didn't you? And Bernard Herrmann.
Well, growing up in Toronto, I was close to a library that had a big music section in it. It was on Avenue Road in St. Clair. I think it might still be there. And I would go in that music library and just take a vinyl disc. And they had music from all over the world. And you could take a 1/4-inch tapes and vinyl discs. And I discovered the music of Toru Takemitsu and Georges Delerue in France, and Nino Rota in Italy, and of course Herman. But I got really interested in the idea of how composers from different countries use music, and how I loved how Takemitsu used silence in his films. And so it really broadened my scope. It made me interested in film more in an experimental sense, because I was still in that kind of underground world of filmmaking. I wasn't really into mainstream films at all. And that led into working with David, I thought, well, because I was interested in his subjects, and the subjects also allowed me a lot of creative freedom. So the first 3 films we did were The Brood, Scanners, and Videodrome, and then The Fly. And in those 4 films, it defined a lot of my work at that time. And I mean, really, that's all I was doing at that time, other than the TV shows. I sort of transitioned from the TV period in the late 70s, and TV allowed me to work on features, and it allowed me economically to be able to do it, because it certainly wasn't making money that I could have lived on. So those early films I could really experiment with and try a lot of different things. And it was in 1986, that was The Fly. It was the 4th Cronenberg film. and After Hours, the Scorsese film.
I was going to say, in '85, I think you had this momentous meeting when, in the
85,
Brill
86.
building in New York.
Yeah, and so, yeah, it was The Fly, After Hours, and the film Big, directed by Penny Marshall.
With Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, and it was a very popular comedy. So with those three films in that one year, it kind of launched you a bit in terms of what was possible with you as a young composer.
Well, we'll return to Cronenberg and Scorsese, but our first clip is actually from a film which swept the Academy Awards in 1990-91, The Silence of the Lambs. And you recently went to the 25th anniversary screening of that in New York, and I think we agreed that that's a film that stands up very, very well.
Yeah.
And it's almost unique among Academy Award winners in that it was released in February, and hardly ever has a winning film been released in the previous winter. And it shows how important people felt it was. And you did the music, and I think today you would have been nominated, but because you were perhaps still on the fringes of Hollywood, you missed out on that. But it was a wonderful score.
Possibly, but I mean, it's beautifully directed. I think it won 5 Oscars.
Yeah, 5 Oscars, and the 4 main ones: Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, Best Film. And by the time of The Fly, you were writing for a full orchestra, weren't you?
The Fly was the first truly symphonic score. I was interested in opera, became interested in opera, and the idea of using opera techniques in film. So The Fly was, in a sense, an opera score. Later, I turned it into an opera and actually staged it in Paris and in Los Angeles. But I had an interest. I can talk about that if you want, maybe in a bit. But I had a real interest in how orchestras were set up in the pit, and how it was how music was used really to tell dramatic stories. And so I connected with opera in that idea. The clip we're going to see from Silence of the Lambs is towards the end, when Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, is in the cellar with the killer Buffalo Bill. And it's a very interesting one from your point of view, in that the clip begins with hardly any music, but just this low